So Cindy has heard me introduce her before, so I'm going to take a chance that she really is coming back and go ahead and introduce her. Cindy hardly needs an introduction with most of you, but she lost her son in a war of aggression, or a war of passive aggression, since it is our passivity and that of Congress that allowed it to happen and continues to allow it to grow worse and worse, depriving more and more mothers and fathers of their children. I met Cindy early in 2005 when she was speaking out against the war. In June 2005, she agreed to testify at an event that I and some other people were helping to organize with Congressman John Conyers, who was at that time in the minority and favored moving toward impeachment. The Democrats held an unofficial minority party hearing in a basement room of the U.S. Capitol, and Cindy spoke. 2 months later, she went to George W. Bush's estate outside Crawford, Texas, and demanded that he speak to her and tell her why her son had to die. That action gave new life to the peace movement and to the impeachment movement and swayed a lot of people. Since then, Cindy has been a leading advocate for peace in this country and on numerous trips outside of it. On my website at afterdowningstreet.org/Cindy, you can find over 1,500 articles about, and many of them by, Cindy Sheehan. In 2006, we won the elections for peace, for impeachment, for those candidates, and we got neither. And it was the peace movement that did that. It wasn't electoral campaign work that did that. But we didn't get anything. And last summer, Cindy traveled through Virginia on her way from Texas to D.C., and she sat in, a lot of us sat in, at John Conyers' office, and he had us arrested. And Cindy announced that she would challenge Nancy Pelosi in the next election if Pelosi did not put impeachment back in our Constitution. And she hasn't. Now Cindy tells me that 3/4 of the doors they knock on in San Francisco sign her petition and say they'll support her. The San Francisco Bay View newspaper has endorsed her campaign. She's raised a substantial amount of money from around the country to campaign with, and I recommend giving her every dime you have and getting another mortgage. Go to cindyforcongress.org and pay up $2,300. Cindy has also just become a grandmother. Tell her congratulations. Welcome, Cindy Sheehan.
Thank you, David. Thank you for coming. And of course, thanks to the Assembly for inviting me to be here. I think this has been a wonderful weekend, and like I said in the last panel, I hope that something good comes out of it, that we are energized to go forward and to truly make a difference. I love. First of all, I saw John Conyers in Detroit the first time after he arrested me. Well, he didn't arrest me, but he had me arrested. And he said, oh, I didn't want you to be arrested. And my campaign manager, who was my assistant at the time, because I wasn't in a campaign yet, said, oh, but you wanted me arrested? He goes, yeah, you're fine. I just didn't want Cindy to be arrested, but 47 of us were arrested in his office that day. And we were talking about movements in the last panel, where we've been involved in marches with hundreds of thousands of people. But that day in D.C. on July 23rd, we marched from the Pentagon to Congress. We had about 300 people. We didn't have a permit. This is something very revolutionary. I don't believe in permits. They say that if you have a crowd of over 25 and you're in a certain place, you must have a permit. Well, I quote the First Amendment to them, and I say it guarantees us the right to peaceably assemble. And as long as we're peaceable, I don't need your permission. Because you know what? This is as much my country as it is yours. And they want to put us in our freedom of speech zones. We were in New York one time, and we marched from the UN to the the UN to the U.S. mission to the UN. Some of you are looking at me because you were there. And they wanted to, when we got to the U.S. mission, they wanted us to go into pens. And I said, no. And I had a bullhorn, and I said, don't you dare go in those pens. And so everybody just followed me, and we stayed on the sidewalk. One time I was in front of the White House. And the day before, George Bush had been given a Purple Heart by a Vietnam vet. This Vietnam vet had like tragically earned 2 or 3 Purple Hearts. And he went and presented one to the president because even though that coward went AWOL during Vietnam, this man who served his duty for empire in another stupid illegal war said, you can be wounded by war. You don't necessarily have to be wounded physically. And poor President Bush has been wounded by the war in Iraq. And so we made a big thing called a yellow badge of cowardice. And we took it to the White House. And I, as David's been with me many times, when we've taken, hundreds and hundreds of pages of thousands of signatures on petitions, and they won't take it. So what do? We just throw them over the fence. And I'm like, one of my other rights is to petition my government for redress of wrongs. And I'm not wrong. You're wrong for not taking it. And so this time they wouldn't take it, so we threw it over the fence. They ran right up and they wanted my ID. They wanted my name. And I said, first of all, you know my name. Secondly, I want your ID because you are not doing your sworn duty. And he wouldn't give me his ID, and pretty soon we were surrounded by police. And I wouldn't give him my name, and I said, what did I do wrong? He goes, you can't throw nothing over the fence. I said, exactly, you can't throw nothing over the fence. And I said, exactly, what statute did I violate? What is the number of that statute? And he couldn't tell me. I said, oh, is that the you can't throw nothing over the fence statute? And so pretty soon, the bike cops were there, and we had about 10 or 12 people. And I said, you know what? I'm hungry. I'm going to breakfast. Get out of my way. And we just started walking down the sidewalk. They parted and let us go. And we're kind of walking going, oh, shit, oh, shit. But they let us go, and the thing is, the reason we've had our rights taken away from us is because we let them take our rights away from us. And we cannot, you might, I've been brutalized by the police, and that might happen to you. But if we don't start doing this, pretty soon they're going to start hauling us away to concentration camps because we just sit there and calmly and apathetically let them take away our rights. So, that was just a prelude to my talk. But that's revolutionary. That's standing up peacefully to the government. I've never had a weapon in my pocket. I've never threatened them with physical harm. They're always the ones that cause the physical harm, not us. So Thomas Jefferson, last panel I said the presidents of the United States of America all belong in a rogues gallery. Every single one of them has not gone in pure of heart, pure of intention, or who has not remained pure of heart in the office. But Thomas Jefferson said, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And he was saying that, of course, he wrote the Declaration of Independence to declare the United States dependence from Great Britain. And what was the name of the king?
King George.
George III. What's the name of our emperor right now? The third. George Washington. George Bush dad. George Bush criminal. advocate watering or refreshing anything with blood. Like I said in the last panel, we don't own AK-47s or Patriot missiles or rocket-propelled grenades or any of those hard, overwhelming weapons of mass destruction. We could never rise up and take up arms against our government the way the colonialists did to the insurgency, the American insurgency against the British Empire, the way they did back then. We would be wiped off the face of the earth. So we have to do something that is revolutionary, radical, that will make an extreme difference, but to do it without violence. Another reason we can't take up arms is because every problem that the United States faces, whether it's real or imaginary, the United States uses violence to solve it. And that's what our children are learning in the streets, is to solve problems by violence. It's something that perpetuates itself. Violence perpetuates violence. And if we overthrow our government violently, we will install a violent regime. And we will have to stay in power using violence. So that's why our revolution has to be nonviolent. Garda, the organizer of this conference, yay Garda, she emailed this panel and said, be as radical as you can. Well, telling me to be radical is like telling George Bush to be stupid. It's just something that comes natural to me. Not being stupid, being radical. So I looked up radical, and one of the definitions is someone who favors drastic political, economic, or social reform. Well, I favor drastic political, economic, and social reform. We have to reform all three to have a true revolution. We can't reform our political system without also reforming our economic and social system, because a political system based solely on the politics of greed and violence do not stay. So we have to have a system where everybody feels safe and secure and prosperous. Not just the people at the top, but everybody in the country. How do we reform our political system? And I only have 20 minutes, so I can't go into deep depth about every reform that we need or how we're going to do that. Hopefully that this will plant the seed that will cause these changes to happen, and we can form alliances and allegiances together to help these changes. First, our political system. I see the biggest problem with the U.S. political system is money. Okay, we have a democracy, like Greg Powell said, that goes to the highest bidder, the person with the most money. And how do these people get their money? From lobbyists, from corporations. So we need to take that money out of politics. We need to shut down K Street, get all the lobbyists out of Washington, D.C. Yes. Our campaigns have to be publicly funded. Our campaigns have to have a limit. I think it's freaking immoral. The money that is spent on presidential and congressional elections. Nancy Pelosi, my opponent, already has $2 million. I have about 999,000 less than her. Well, actually, I have to subtract 150,000 from that really quick. We've done particularly well being independent. We've raised a good chunk of money, but it takes money, but it doesn't take millions of dollars. Hillary and Obama, they get $30 million a month. There's so much problems in our world, in our country, that could be solved with that kind of money. And I think the seasons are too long. This might just be my own opinion, But to save money, we shorten the length of time. No campaigning till Labor Day before the election. And then we go through the primary season, and we go after the conventions, and then we have our elections. You know, they don't talk about the issues. So when we have such long elections, we have to suffer through crazy pastors, whom I don't think is crazy, and lapel pins. You know, I don't care if Nancy Pelosi has a crazy pastor or whether she wears a lapel pin or not. I'm not running against her because of superficial issues. I'm running against her because of deep, fundamental, systemic sickness in our country. And that's what they won't talk about, because you know what? The mainstream media and the candidates are involved in that systemic sickness. So they won't talk about those kind of issues. But maybe if we shorten the season, they might actually have to. We need to have, after we reform the money in politics, we have to reform our electoral system. I believe that true democracy happens when more people's voices are allowed. We have a two-party system where, like Ralph Nader says, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. It's a duopoly that has a stranglehold on our system, and it oppresses and destroys democracy. Third parties, it would be great if we really had a second party. Fourth parties, fifth parties, a Green Party, a Labor Party, a Social Democratic Party, even have like a Social Christian Party, whatever party you want to belong to. If you want to belong to the pot-smoking hippie party, then you start that party. And you belong to it. You know what? I bet you have a lot of people join your party. That's a party. That's a party. What kind of economic reforms? Basic economic reforms in the short time we're given. First of all, I truly believe, and I'm glad this isn't in 1950, because I believe that capitalism is the root of all evil. You know, was that radical enough for you, Garda? Was that radical enough for you? You know how Jesus, it wasn't even Jesus, it was in Timothy. Timothy is a book in the New Testament that said the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, what is capitalism but the love of money over keeping people safe, over housing people, over giving people universal health care, over giving people a good education, whether you belong to the property class or not. So we have to repeal such things as NAFTA and free trade agreements don't have proper environmental controls, and if they do, they're ignored. They don't have proper labor provisions, and that's what's caused our jobs to go overseas or down to Mexico, where the capitalists can pay far less to make their product. And I believe that if you make shoes here in Radford, Virginia, or if you make shoes in Juarez, Mexico, you should be paid a livable wage. And that's not happening with these free trade agreements. And that would cure a lot of immigration from Mexico to the United States. I was just in Mexico. Guess what? They don't want to come here. They want to live in Mexico and earn a living in Mexico. But our governments prevent that from happening. We need to repeal, or it's a Supreme Court decision, so it has to be overturned. The County of Santa Clara versus the Southern Pacific Railroad that gave corporations personhood. They're not people. They're business entities. They should not have the same protection as people do. That's basically my economic reform. There's so many other things we can do. This is a country where it's a consumeristic country based on credit. Our dollar is backed by nothing but credit and commodities trading. And the most stable commodity we have is oil. And that's what our economy is based on. So to fix that problem, we have to not reduce, but cut our dependency on fossil fuels. Not just foreign fossil fuels, but domestic fossil fuels. We're right next to West Virginia. There's no such thing as clean coal. And they're destroying mountaintops to get this coal to make it clean coal. And the process for making clean coal is dirty. And what is coal? The coal is a fossil fuel. And I want people to have jobs where they don't have to pollute their lungs and the environment to work. So why don't we put these people to work, not developing alternative or sustainable forms of energy, but helping to increase them and to use them and put them into practice. I only have 2 minutes left, but that's okay. Social reforms. I've already talked a little bit about that, and Donna will talk more about universal single-payer health care. We have 45 to 50 million people in this country without health care. That's obscene. That's obscene in a country that is supposed to be the leader, the world's leader. And you know why we don't have universal health care? Because big pharma and insurance companies line the pockets of our representatives. Well, Nancy Pelosi's biggest contributor is Amgen, which is a pharmaceutical company. And she's not for a universal single payer. She's for the system where the health care companies are involved. I don't have health care. If I could buy it, I would buy it. So they want to force us to buy something that I can't get? So that is a basic human right, is the right to health care. One of the reasons that we have such an overtly militaristic society is because when our kids go to kindergarten, one of the first things they learn is the Pledge of Allegiance. Then we have an education system, and I was a history major, so trust me, I know this. In history, you only learn about American history from war to war to war. And not until I got to UCLA did I even know that there was a women's movement, that there was a union movement, that there was... I knew there was an anti-slavery movement because they try to say that's the reason for the Civil War. So we are not taught, we're taught that we live in the greatest country that's ever been on the face of the earth. And I don't have to tell any of you that that's false. So quickly I'm going to close my speech. We need free and good education from preschool to university. If we had that, why would our children have to participate in the killing war machine? Casey went into the Army in May of 2000 so he could complete his education, and he never got to complete his education because he was killed in an illegal and immoral war. And Martin Luther King Jr. said that we need a revolution of values. And what is more revolutionary than Americans sharing our prosperity? Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. One of the best speakers I've seen at peace events and impeachment events over the past few years is a guy named Kevin Zeese, who for a long time was working with a group called Democracy Rising. He's now the director of Voters for Peace. Go to votersforpeace.us or truevote.us. He's also helped put together something called Filibuster for Peace, which we could have used last week. And he is someone who's not tied down to any particular party or ideology. He's pushing hard for our representatives to start representing us. Please welcome Kevin Zeese.
First off, I want to thank Garda and Prout and Radford for hosting us. We appreciate that. It's running smoothly. I'm glad to see that. I also want to echo what David said when he started, which was support Cindy Sheehan. I think the majority of this panel is arrested with Cindy Sheehan in the office challenging her impeachment. So we are big Sheehan supporters and followers, and hope that you will put your money into her campaign, which is one of the most important things going on politically this year. If she can mount a real serious challenge against Nancy Pelosi, so Nancy Pelosi feels it at home, and if she comes to Congress, what a world we will see. What a radical shift, the beginning of a real revolution if that occurs. And it's not out of the question. It's not out of the question. San Francisco is a very interesting city. It's a city that does not feel represented by Pelosi's politics, and so I hope that you'll support her campaign. It deserves your support. It deserves all of our support. So please do that. We're here to talk about evolution with an R. We add the R because it needs to be rapid. And it needs to be rapid because whether or not we want it to be rapid, it is going to be rapid. We're running out of oil. We're running into climate change. We're seeing the economy start to falter and crumble. It's going to be rapid. When those things happen, it does not mean we'll get the world we want unless we're prepared for it. So our job now is prepare for the change that is going to come. Change is going to happen. We have to hopefully impact it in a way that moves in the direction we want to move it in. And I don't see that happening right now. And I think we need to really up our efforts dramatically. The people in this room, I think, all know the realities that we're facing in this current environment, and I think we need to up our activity significantly. One of the things I think that's the biggest block, and I'm going to focus on this for most of my 10 minutes, the biggest block to making change is our self-deception. Our self-deception as a country. People in this country do not believe we're an empire. They do not believe that we're imperialists. The worst they'll go is we're the policemen of the world. They won't admit. We like to put ourselves out as we do more for the world than any other country. Well, I was just in China for the last month, and when the earthquake happened there, they published the amount of money each country was promising. The United States promised $500,000, $500,000. Japan promised $5 billion. Give you a little spin, but there was a long list of other countries in between. We were at the bottom. So doing the most for the world is way off base. And we have there's an incredible, I do a lot of radio, and there's a lot of misperception about our support for people around the world. I think we give all this foreign aid money. We give less than 1% of our GDP in foreign aid. It's a tiny, minute amount of foreign aid. We're not, if you want to talk about foreign aid, the foreign aid we give is military support. And it's primarily to one country. Israel. And it's a topic we can't discuss in this country. That's an area of great self-deception. Israel is our great democratic ally in the Middle East. Come on. This is a country that violates the international law on a daily basis. They use the weapons we provide them. They use the weapons we provide them to slaughter civilians. Their own troops, the refuseniks who refuse to fight in the occupation, say that we are destroying a whole group of people and they refuse to participate. Because it's not good for Israel either. But we won't discuss this in the United States. We won't discuss a country the size of New Jersey getting as much foreign aid, i.e. military aid, as all of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean combined. And it's off the table for discussion. Self-deception. Self-deception is a great problem for our country. We have to break through that barrier. And the first place we have to break through is ourselves. Because we have some self-deception in our movement as well. There's a lot of people in our movement, for example, who believe that we have a real democracy. That there actually is a choice between Democrats versus Republicans. That Obama's going to end the war. When he says the opposite. Yet they deceive themselves. They want to believe so badly that Obama will end the war. Yet he says he's going to leave the mercenaries there, 140,000 of them. He's going to leave the non-combat troops, up to 80,000 of them. He's going to put the combat troops in Kuwait so they can do strikes into Iraq. That's ending the war? That's expanding the war to Kuwait. That's making a bigger Middle East problem. He says he's willing to bomb Iran. Yeah, I'll talk to them, but I got the bomb behind me. And he's kowtowing to Israel. Just this week, He went and kowtowed further. Why? Because he's not pure enough for them. Even though he's saying everything they want to hear, and yet he's going to kowtow to a temple in Boca Raton, Florida this week. He doesn't kowtow to the peace movement. Why? Because the peace movement makes no demands. That's a self-deception we have to face up to. The peace movement makes no demands. We have Progressives for Obama led by Tom Hayden, supposedly a peace advocate. And yet he's supporting a guy who wants to leave 180,000 mercenaries and troops in Iraq and put up strike forces in Kuwait, support Israel, bomb Iran. He calls himself a peace advocate? Sorry, man, you're too old, bud. 60s are over for you. Wake up and see what's happening today. What's happening today is we're being given a choice of a candidate who happens to be black, which I think it's great to have a black president. I'd love to see that. I'd much rather have Cynthia McKinney.
Cynthia McKinney.
I think I really got convinced that the Democrats and Republicans were no different, that they were one party working together. I was working on the Ralph Nader campaign in 2004, probably the most unpopular campaign in recent history. I was Ralph's spokesperson. I was very honored to be Ralph's spokesperson. I was told after the campaign he'd never let anyone speak for him before, so that was really an honor. And what I found, though, was in Pennsylvania, many states, state after state, in Pennsylvania, for example, the Democrats were working to keep us off the ballot. They didn't want to give people the choice of having Ralph Nader on the ballot. And who did they team up with? A right-wing Republican law firm that gave hundreds of thousands of dollars of free time to keep Ralph Nader off the ballot in Pennsylvania. So a Republican law firm teamed up with the Democratic Party to keep Nader off the ballot. What does that tell you? It tells you that the choice that they were afraid of was having someone who's an anti-corporatist on the ballot. Someone who's going to raise the truth about our corporate-controlled government, where heads of agencies are former CEOs of corporations, or their lobbyists, or their trade association, or their lawyers. That's who heads all these regulatory agencies that regulate capitalism. Corporations regulate themselves in our corporate-controlled government. And this Republican law firm and the Democratic corporatists didn't want an anti-corporate candidate on the ballot to get that message out in Pennsylvania. The real choices we face are corporatists versus anti-corporatists. And that is the battle. And don't be deluded by party label. Face the reality of what the candidate is saying. Obama favors coal, favors nuclear, favors funding the health insurance industry with our tax dollars rather than challenging this corrupt industry. He favors all the foreign policy issues I've described. This is not an anti-corporatist. This is someone who's playing the game. He wants to expand the U.S. military by 92,000 troops at a cost of billions of dollars a year. He wants to put as much into Iraq. He's voted for as much in Iraq multiple times now as he's promised to put into dealing with climate change over 10 years. He's talking about a $150 billion climate change program over 10 years. Nowhere near enough. He's talking about subsidies for college. It costs $50 billion a year to provide free college to every American 18 years old in this country. $50 billion a year, 1 month in Iraq is enough. So we have some serious problems that we have to face up to. And one of the self-delusions I want to highlight for ourselves, a couple of things I want to highlight. First is our own movement. Let's be realistic where we are. We have so many tools at our disposal that people in the past who've tried to make change have not had. The populist movement in the 1800s, they went by horse and buggy, thousands of miles to organize and successfully fight, run governors, senators, congressmen, get people elected. We have the internet. We can click a button and begin talking to tens of thousands of people for no charge. And we can't organize our way out of this mess we're in. We've got to redouble our efforts. We've got to get down to serious door-to-door work. We've got to I'm so glad you're doing door-to-door work, Cindy, in San Francisco. That is where you really make it happen. I was mentored by Black Panther about organizing. I said to him, so what's the key to organizing? The key to organizing, he says, is go out, turn right, and knock on the door. Find out what they need. Find out what they need and offer to help them. They want the grass cut? Say, I'll cut your grass if you'll listen to me about politics. If you'll vote on election day. That's organizing. Get to know what people need, and then you can find those problems. One other thing I want to focus on before I close is the support the troops. I was just having lunch with Adam Kokesh of Iraq Vets Against the War, and this support the troops phrase is kind of dragging this war on. And the support the troops phrase makes us admire people who are involved in criminal wars. And I realize that some of these folks go to these criminal wars and come out and become great advocates for justice and for peace. But many don't. I guarantee the majority of veterans will vote for John McCain this year. So they're still believing on empire, even though they've been participants in criminal wars, which have gone on for 100 years. Smedley Butler, the most decorated Marine in history, talked about war being a racket 1930. So this is not a new idea. So let me face the truth, tell the truth, and have the courage and conviction. We are right, and we're fighting life and death situations. So don't compromise. Don't compromise. Stand for what you believe in. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Kevin. I told you it was good. I'm going to take a turn at the mic, and then we've got two more panelists. My name is David Swanson. I have a website called afterdowningstreet.org. I know we're preaching to the choir here, but the choir isn't always singing loudly enough or together. So let me tell you this. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." And he added, "A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth." And he added, "A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just." And he concluded by saying, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." I suspect that King's phrase, revolution of values, has roots in Friedrich Nietzsche's phrase, revaluation of all values. I suspect that King admired Nietzsche's radicalism, his proposal to question the morality of our most central morality and to establish a new view of how we ought to behave. But I suspect that King found Nietzsche's own attempt to lay out new moral guidelines to be pointlessly cruel and heartless. In his final address to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King said, "There's nothing wrong with power if power is used correctly. You see, what happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as polar opposites, so that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. It was this misinterpretation that caused Nietzsche, who was a philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. It was this same misinterpretation which induced Christian theologians to reject the Nietzschean philosophy of the will to power in the name of the Christian idea of love. Now we've got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. I can't hear you, but I wish you could. This is a, end of quotation. This is a revaluation of values that we have not yet succeeded in making. It is still little known, even to ourselves, that the strongest politicians do not support the waging of war against weaker peoples. That the strongest voices in the United States today oppose the occupation of Iraq, and this is the part that's furthest from public consciousness, that they oppose the war out of love for the people of Iraq and the world and the United States. The revolution or revaluation that we need begins with a rejection of all notions of superiority, of nation, of race, of religion. Either 80% of Iraqis have long wanted the United States to get out of Iraq, and yet we stay there and tell ourselves it is for the good of the Iraqis. In fact, there are dozens of nations around the world whose people would like to be rid of U.S. military bases, but we can't hear those people. If we could, our lives would be enriched by new friendships, new cooperation, new insights, and cultural gifts. Thinking of ourselves as equals with others would actually make us better off. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Just as hard is moving away from militarism. We not only need to make the necessary changes to run our economy on something other than weapons, but we need to drop the notion that weapons make us safe. It's not just the occupation of Iraq that has made us less safe because it's been poorly handled by a military that's stretched thin and ought to be even bigger. In fact, it's the existence of this mammoth military that puts us in danger. It is designed for offense, not defense. It exists to be used. During 86% of the days since this nation was founded, its military has been used somewhere in the world. Often the U.S. military fights against weapons manufactured in and sold by or given as so-called aid by the United States. We should not fear our failure to manufacture new weapons. We should fear our failure to make friends with and share prosperity with new people. We need to revalue our planet and value it more than we ever previously valued our own bodies. We should abandon the notion that there is an away to which things can be thrown. We should value economic goods in ways that include their full costs. We should recognize, when appropriate, the reality of urgency. It can become too late to stop the devastation of a planet or the launching of a war or the sliding of a nation into fascism. Patience can be the furthest thing from a virtue. We need a revolution of political values. We should cease giving all of our loyalty to what this nation's founders called factions and we call political parties. I spoke at a rally in eastern Tennessee down the road from here last year in an area that had backed the abolition of slavery and then stuck by the Republican Party until it became the party of racism and slavery again. We've all experienced or witnessed the temptation to stick by the Democratic Party as it becomes something grotesquely unlike what we visualize it to be. Of course, dropping the importance of parties does not mean devoting ourselves to the destruction of a particular party or the creation of a particular new party. It means placing a value on individual elected officials who represent their constituents rather than the leader of a party. We need to view a president not as the head of a party or even of a nation, but as the executor of the people's laws as created by our representatives in what should be the most powerful branch of our government, the Congress. We need to value Congress members more highly, but demand more of them. But not more in the way of expertise, so much as more in the way of transparency, accountability, and effort. We need to abandon the notion of permanent politicians in favor of short-term representatives. We also need to value citizens more highly and demand more of them. And I say citizens, not voters. Serving as a citizen of a democracy should involve effort every day of the year. Elections should absorb our attention for little more than a day every 2 years. Election madness in the form of 2 endless years of obsession every 4 years, over and over again with yet another most important election of your lifetime, must end, or elections will be the death of democracy. When I say citizen, I also don't mean amateur pundit. As citizens, we should be willing to push straightforwardly for exactly what we want. We should compromise, but not prior to opening our mouths. We should not fear losing, which is perhaps the single biggest cause of losing. We should resist this week with all our energy the proposal in Congress to throw another $165 billion into occupying Iraq. This failed in the House, then passed in the Senate. Now it's back to the House for a new vote with some relatively teeny good things, including veterans care, built into the same vote. Every member of Congress needs to hear while they are home for the next week, before they go back to vote on this thing, they need to hear that we will remember in November and oppose them if they vote yes to extend the occupation, no matter what else is in the bill. Our goal is for Congress to send the White House a note saying simply, there shall be no more funding, bring them all home. But that's not all we need Congress to do to the White House. The revolution we need could involve a lot of restoration of things we've lost that we won in a revolution in the 1770s. Veterans for Peace has taken words from the Declaration of Independence and created what they call the Declaration of Impeachment. And it reads exactly like an indictment of the current King George III. But we shouldn't actually impeach him, right? We don't want to start that sort of crisis and trauma, right? So impeachment is not a crisis. It is a cure for a crisis. Impeachment is not about an individual or a party. Impeachment is discussed at length in our Constitution, which does not mention parties. Impeachment is the means by which we restore the rule of law when it has been damaged or eliminated. Impeachment is a way to establish a precedent for future presidents and vice presidents, not just a way to punish an individual. John Adams, who was later our second president, wrote some words in the Constitution of Massachusetts which have been quoted with approval by the state Supreme Court of every single state. He described the separation of powers among three branches and said this would be done, quote, to the end it may be a government of laws and not of men. Tom Paine, in his common sense pamphlets that helped start a revolution, said, quote, so far as we approve of monarchy in America, the law is the king. For as in absolute governments the king is the law, so in free countries the law ought to be king and there ought to be no other. This was revolutionary, and it still is. The Constitution is the law of our land. Failure to uphold it amounts to moving our country in the direction of lawlessness, the direction of the rule of men and women. The current president has violated laws and abused power to such an extent that to let it pass unchallenged will establish that future presidents and vice presidents need obey laws only when they want to. This president has violated old laws and new laws, laws he signed into law himself, often announcing his intention to violate them with a signing statement. He has spied without warrants, detained without charges, tortured, lied to the public and the Congress about matters of the gravest importance. We might get lucky. We might elect a new president who does not abuse any of the new powers this president has seized. If we get that lucky, what about the next president? And the next one? And the next one? And what about the next 8 months of an administration threatening to add new wars on top of the ones we've got? We are not supposed to have to trust a king to be benevolent. We are supposed to be able to count on our representatives in the House to hold our executive accountable. That is why we have a revolution. But isn't it too late? It's not actually ever too late to put our Bill of Rights back and to establish that future presidents have to obey laws. It is far from too late to try to prevent the damage possible in the next 8 months. And there is nothing else for this godforsaken Congress to do. Any good bill is vetoed, any bad bill becomes law, any mixed bill gets signing statemented. Impeachment cannot be vetoed. It's the only thing they can do. And it could be very quick, given the evidence. Most impeachment efforts also accomplish great things, short of ever getting to impeachment. Think Alberto Gonzalez, think Harry Truman, think Eliot Spitzer. Maybe not great, but significant things. It is not uncommon for impeachment efforts to begin later in a term than where we are now. Think Andrew Johnson, think Herbert Hoover, think Harry Truman. And while preliminary investigations of the sort we've had for the past year and a half or more can be dragged out, impeachments tend not to take very long. An impeachment of Bush and Cheney for some of their indisputable offenses could take a day, and that would not be unprecedented. Andrew Johnson was impeached 3 days after the offense for which he was impeached. Senator William Blount was impeached 4 days after the offense for which he was impeached. Now, there's no reason you couldn't drag out impeachment hearings. Educating the public is a goal. My point is that you don't have to. A Senate trial. The Senate expelled Blount the day after he was impeached. Judge Halstead Ritter's trial took 11 days. Judge John Pickering's trial took 9 days. Judge James Peck's trial took 3 days. And Judge West Humphrey's trial took 1 day. The House began impeaching Bill Clinton October 8th, 1998, and was done on December 19th. The Senate trial, January 14th to February 12th. The whole 4-month farce took less than half the time remaining to Bush and Cheney. If there is a time for endless hours of grilling steroid-popping baseball players, there is time for impeachment. Go to afterdowningstreet.org to read the parts of this speech I left out and to find over 100 candidates for Congress, including Cindy Sheehan, who demand impeachment. Spend the next week letting your representative know that you will work to unseat them and that you will do everything you can to non-violently make their work impossible unless they agree to put impeachment back in our Constitution, to keep our republic, and to avoid the necessity of starting the American experiment over from scratch. Thank you.